Terrence was 38 years old, a welding instructor at Memphis Community College, and he made exactly $54,300 a year before taxes. He was a good man, a man who found satisfaction in the clean, bright seam of a perfect weld, in the smell of hot metal, in the pride on a student's face when they finally mastered a difficult technique. His hands were calloused and strong, and they were good for fixing leaky faucets, assembling impossible-to-assemble toys, and gently detangling the colorful plastic beads from his daughter's hair. On this particular Friday night in October, at 8:17 p.m., those same hands were trembling as he held a small, folded piece of construction paper in the sterile, humming quiet of his 2012 Toyota Camry. The car, with 187,000 miles on the odometer and a persistent rattle in the passenger door, was parked on the third level of a parking garage in East Memphis. The structure was attached to a gleaming glass tower that housed one of the city's most expensive steakhouses, a place called Argent. It was a world away from his modest single-story bungalow in Orange Mound, a home filled with the scent of his daughter's bubble bath and the faint, sweet smell of the gardenias he grew in the backyard. The note was from his 7-year-old Amari. Her printing was big and wobbly, the pencil strokes heavy. It said simply, "Mama said don't tell Daddy." That was it, just those 5 words. She had slipped it into his hand an hour ago, her small, warm fingers pressing the paper into his palm with a conspiratorial seriousness that had broken his heart before he even knew why. Her deep brown eyes, a perfect reflection of his own, were wide and worried. He'd asked her, "Don't tell Daddy what, Sweet Pea?" But she had just shaken her head, her beautiful braids and their rainbow of beads clicking softly, a promise already made to her mother. His wife, Khadijah, was inside Argent at that very moment. She was celebrating a big promotion at the logistics firm where she worked as a senior analyst. Her salary was jumping from a respectable $95,000 to a staggering $150,000 a year. It was a corporate dinner, she'd said, partners and VPs. She had dressed for the occasion in a new dress, a sleek, dark green thing he'd later learn was a $2,400 Burberry sheath. She'd looked incredible, her elegant twists piled high, her luminous, deep brown skin glowing. She'd kissed Amari goodbye, a brief peck on the forehead, and then given Terrence a look that was somewhere between pity and impatience. "Don't wait up," she'd said, her voice clipped. "This is important." He hadn't planned on coming. He was supposed to be at home, watching a movie with Amari, maybe eating the popcorn he'd bought for $3.99 at Kroger. But the note felt like a splinter in his mind. He had to know. What was the secret? After tucking a now-sleeping Amari into bed, he'd driven the 25 minutes from the cozy, worn-down streets of Orange Mound to the glittering, sterile wealth of East Memphis. He had no plan. He just felt a pull, a cold dread that coiled in his gut. He thought maybe he'd just sit in the car, see her leave, maybe gauge her mood. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he had a terrible feeling that he was about to find it. The chasm that had been slowly, silently growing between them for years felt like it was about to crack wide open, right here, under the cold, white lights of a concrete garage. He had no idea how right he was. What do you think a child's intuition can tell us that we adults refuse to see? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories that show how truth always finds a way. Their life, on the surface, was a portrait of domestic normalcy. The bungalow on a quiet street in Orange Mound was small, just under 1,100 square feet, but it was theirs. They'd bought it 10 years ago for $89,000, and Terrence had poured his soul into it. He'd retiled the bathroom himself, a weekend project that cost him $400 in materials and 2 aching knees. He'd built the bookshelves in the living room from reclaimed pine, sanding and staining the wood until it shone. The garden in the back was his sanctuary, a riot of tomatoes, collard greens, and the fragrant gardenias that reminded him of his late mother. Most mornings started the same way. Terrence would be up at 5:45 a.m., the sky still a deep, bruised purple over Memphis. He'd make coffee, the $12 bag of community coffee lasting them 2 weeks, and pack Amari's lunch. A turkey sandwich, an apple, a small bag of carrots, and a note written on a napkin. "Have a great day, my star," or "Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky." The lunchbox was a bright pink unicorn-themed one that cost $19.99 at Target, a birthday gift from him. Khadijah would emerge later, usually around 7 a.m., already in motion. She was a whirlwind of ambition, a sharp, intelligent woman whose energy was increasingly directed toward her career. She'd be checking emails on her $1,200 iPhone while sipping a special green tea she ordered online, a box of which cost $45. "Morning," she'd murmur, her focus already 1,000 miles away, in an office tower downtown. The contrast between them had become a source of quiet, gnawing friction. Terrence's work was tangible. He taught young men and women a skill, a trade that could build a life. He wore a simple $89 Timex watch, its face scratched from years of work. His pride came from seeing a former student open their own fabrication shop or land a union job. He loved the stability and purpose of it. Khadijah saw it differently. She worked in the abstract world of global logistics, of numbers on a screen and percentage points of efficiency. Her world was one of quarterly reports, stakeholder meetings, and a clear, ruthless corporate ladder. To her, his $54,300 salary wasn't a stable foundation. It was an anchor. "Terrence, did you see the email about the parent-teacher conferences?" he'd ask, wiping down the counter. "Scan it and send it to me," she'd reply, without looking up from her phone. "I have back-to-back calls from 9 until noon." The financial disparity was a constant, unspoken character in their marriage. He managed their household budget meticulously on a spreadsheet, accounting for every dollar. Their mortgage was $750 a month, utilities another $300, groceries around $600. His salary covered all of it, just barely. Her income, which had been steadily climbing, was for what she called the future. It went into a separate account, one she managed. "It's just cleaner for tax purposes," she'd explained years ago, and he, trusting her, had agreed. The car was a perfect symbol of their diverging paths. His 2012 Toyota Camry was reliable, paid off, and practical. Hers was a leased white BMW 3 Series, a sleek machine that cost $780 a month. "It's about image, Terrence," she'd said when she got it. "You have to look successful to be successful." He'd looked at the lease agreement, the $43,000 price tag, making his stomach clench. But he'd co-signed. He wanted to support her. He believed in her. His love for Amari was the sun his entire world orbited. He was the one who braided her hair, his big, clumsy fingers surprisingly deft as he wove the strands, adding the beads that she loved. He was the one who read her bedtime stories, his deep voice, creating a world of brave knights and clever princesses. He was the one who sat with her at the small, child-sized table he'd built, patiently helping her with her homework. One afternoon, a few months before the promotion dinner, he'd come home to find Khadijah in the living room, staring at the wall with a look of intense dislike. "I can't stand this house anymore," she said, not as a complaint, but as a statement of fact. "It's so small. The walls are closing in." "It's our home, Khadi," he said gently. "We've been happy here." "You've been happy here," she corrected, her voice sharp. "I've been biding my time." This isn't a life, Terrence. It's a waiting room. He didn't know what to say. He looked around the room he had poured so much of himself into, the bookshelves he'd built, the family photos on the mantel, the crayon drawing from Amari taped to the wall. It felt like a life to him. It felt like everything. But for her, it was just a facade, a temporary set for a play she was desperate to leave. And he was beginning to realize she saw him as just another piece of the scenery. The outrage didn't accumulate all at once. It was a slow build, a series of 1,000 tiny cuts that bled him dry of his illusions. Each one, on its own, could be explained away, dismissed as stress or ambition. But together, they formed a mosaic of betrayals so clear and devastating it would eventually steal his breath. The first major crack appeared the day she got the call about the promotion. She came home glowing, incandescent with victory. "I got it," she announced, dropping her $4,800 Chanel handbag, a corporate bonus, she'd claimed, onto the kitchen table. Senior Vice President of Regional Operations, $150,000 a year, Terrence, plus a performance bonus that could be another 50. He was genuinely happy for her. He hugged her, lifting her off the ground. "That's incredible, baby. I'm so proud of you." "We're moving," she said, her voice already distant, her eyes scanning their small kitchen with disdain. "Germantown. Or maybe Collierville. Gated community, good schools, a real house. Something over 4,000 square feet. With a pool?" "Whoa, slow down," he laughed, setting her down. "Let's celebrate first. We can talk about all that later." "There's nothing to talk about," she said, her smile gone. "I'm not raising my daughter in Orange Mound. We're getting out. I'm getting us out." The emphasis was not lost on him. I'm getting us out. His contribution, the home he provided, the stable, loving environment for their child, was erased in that single sentence. A few weeks later, the topic of a vacation came up. It was his idea. "Amari has a fall break coming up," he said over dinner. "I was thinking we could finally take that camping trip to the Smokies. I can borrow a tent from my buddy Mike. It would be beautiful." Khadijah put her fork down and stared at him as if he'd suggested they live in a tree. A small, cruel laugh escaped her lips. "Camping? Terrence? Are you serious? I'm a vice president at a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I don't camp. I'm thinking more along the lines of Paris. Or at least a week in Sonoma. Something civilized." "Paris?" he stammered. "Khadijah, a week in Paris would cost, I don't know, $10,000, $15,000. We can't afford that." "You mean you can't afford that?" she said, her voice like ice. "My first bonus check will cover it easily. You and Amari can go look at bears in the woods if you want. I'll send you a postcard from the Louvre." She picked up her fork and resumed eating. The conversation, as far as she was concerned, over. He sat in silence, the taste of his food turning to ash in his mouth. The casual cruelty of it, the clear line she had drawn between her life and his, was a physical blow. Then came the news about Marcus. His godfather, Marcus Thorne, was not a blood relative, but he was the closest thing to a father Terrence had ever known. A brilliant, eccentric black man who had made a fortune in early tech investments. Marcus had been his mentor, his champion. He was the one who encouraged Terrence to go to trade school, telling him, "A man who can build things with his own two hands will never truly be poor." When Terrence received the call that Marcus had passed away suddenly from a heart attack at 65, he was shattered. He spent the next few days in a fog of grief. He'd sit in his workshop for hours, holding a cold welding torch, lost in memories. Khadijah's patience was non-existent. "Terrence, I know you're sad, but you can't just mope around forever," she said on the third day, her tone one of extreme annoyance. "It's unproductive. Life goes on." "He was my father, Khadi," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "He was your godfather," she corrected. "And he's gone. I have a major presentation next week, and I need you to be present. I can't have this gloom hanging over the house." She didn't attend the funeral. She claimed there was a critical can't-miss-it meeting with the board. He went alone, standing by the grave as they lowered the casket of the man who had shaped his entire sense of self-worth. He felt a profound loneliness that day, a chill that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. A week after the funeral, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived from a prestigious law firm in downtown Memphis. It was addressed to him. The return address was Henderson and Associates, attorneys at law. He knew it was Marcus's estate lawyer. Khadijah saw it on the hall table before he did. "What's this?" she asked, holding it by the corner as if it were contaminated. "I think it's from Marcus's lawyer," he said. She let out another one of those short, derisive laughs. "Oh, the dramatic sealed letter. What do you think he left you? His collection of rusty tools and first edition philosophy books?" She tossed it onto the table. "Don't get your hopes up. Rich people don't give their money to people like us." People like us. The phrase hung in the air. She meant, of course, people like you. She no longer saw herself as one of them. He didn't open the letter. The grief was still too raw. The thought of dealing with legal matters felt like a betrayal of his mourning. He tucked it away in a drawer in his workshop, deciding to deal with it when he felt stronger. He had no idea that the contents of that envelope held the power to change everything, and that his delay was a critical mistake he would soon be profoundly grateful for. In the weeks that followed, her behavior grew more secretive. She started taking her phone calls on the back patio, her voice a low murmur. When he asked who she was talking to, she'd wave a dismissive hand. "Work. You wouldn't understand." Mail started disappearing. Statements from their joint bank account, which he usually reviewed, were suddenly nowhere to be found. When he asked, she claimed she'd switched to paperless statements to save the trees. The final cut, the one that should have opened his eyes completely, was the Chanel handbag. The one she said was a corporate gift. One evening, while looking for a stamp in her desk drawer, he found a crumpled credit card receipt. It was from a boutique in Nashville. A single charge for $4,800. The card number wasn't one he recognized. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. She had another credit card. And she had lied, so easily, so casually, about a purchase that was nearly a month of his take-home pay. He confronted her, holding the receipt. She didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. She snatched it from his hand. "It's my money, Terrence. I earned it. Do I need your permission to buy myself something nice? After all these years of scrimping and saving, of living in this dump and driving that piece of junk you call a car? I don't think so." "It's not about the money, Khadijah," he said, his voice quiet. "It's that you lied to me." "Oh, grow up," she scoffed, turning her back on him. "It was a white lie to avoid a lecture from you about budgeting. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It was a declaration. Her life, her money, her choices, they were no longer a part of their shared existence. She was building a new life, brick by expensive brick, and it was a life that had no room for a welding instructor from Orange Mound. The night of the discovery began with a lie. "It's just the partners and the senior VPs," Khadijah had said, applying a final slick of a deep red, $45 lipstick. She was a vision in the Burberry dress, a portrait of success. "It would just be boring for you, all shop talk." He knew it was an excuse. She didn't want him there. She didn't want her new high-powered colleagues to meet her husband, the man with grease under his fingernails and a salary that wouldn't even cover her new wardrobe. The rejection stung, but he swallowed it, as he had swallowed so much else, for Amari. "Okay, baby," he said, his voice warmer than he felt. "Knock 'em dead." "Oh, I will," she said, a strange, triumphant glint in her eye. She kissed Amari goodbye and was out the door, the throaty growl of her BMW's engine fading down the street. He and Amari settled on the couch to watch a movie, but his daughter was quiet. Her usual bubbly energy dimmed. Halfway through, she crawled into his lap and laid her head on his chest. It was then that she pushed the folded piece of construction paper into his hand. "Mama said don't tell Daddy." Her voice was a whisper. He unfolded it. The wobbly letters felt like a punch to the gut. "Mama said don't tell Daddy." "Don't tell me what, Sweet Pea?" he asked again, his heart beginning to thud a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. She just burrowed her face deeper into his shirt and shook her head, a silent, loyal soldier caught between two worlds. He held her tight, the scent of her lavender shampoo filling his senses, and a cold, terrifying certainty began to dawn. The secret wasn't about a surprise party or a Christmas present. It was something much, much bigger. At 7:45 p.m., after he'd read her 2 stories and tucked her into bed, watching until her breathing evened out into the soft sighs of sleep, he couldn't sit still. The 5 words on that piece of paper echoed in his mind. He needed to be closer to the source of the secret. He grabbed his keys. The drive to East Memphis was a blur. He navigated the familiar streets automatically, his mind racing. What could it be? Was she having an affair? Was she planning to move them without telling him the details? Every possibility felt both outlandish and terrifyingly plausible. He pulled into the parking garage for Argent at 8:12 p.m. The garage was a cathedral of wealth. Gleaming Teslas, Porsches, and Mercedes-Benzes were parked in neat rows. His Camry, with its faded paint and the dent in the rear bumper from a runaway shopping cart, felt like an intruder. He found a spot on the 3rd level and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. He sat there for a few minutes staring at the concrete wall, feeling foolish. What was he even doing here? Spying on his own wife? It felt pathetic. He was about to start the car and go home when a young man in a red valet jacket came jogging toward his window. Terrence rolled it down. "Can I help you?" "Evening, sir," the valet said, a little breathless. "I think the lady you're with dropped this. She was getting out of a white BMW just now and it fell out of her tote bag. I tried to call after her, but she was already inside." The valet held out a sleek black leather folder. It was the kind of expensive, minimalist accessory that screamed corporate. It probably cost more than his monthly car insurance. On the bottom right corner, in small silver letters, were the initials KDL, Khadijah Denise Lattimore, her maiden name. "Oh," Terrence said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Thank you. Yes, that's hers." He took the folder. It felt heavy in his hands, dense with importance. The valet nodded and jogged away. Terrence stared at the folder. His first instinct was to run inside and give it to her. His second, darker instinct, the one born of 1,000 tiny cuts and one wobbly, heartbreaking note, was to open it. His hands were shaking again, but this time with a grim purpose. He clicked on the Camry's dim yellow dome light. The folder wasn't locked. It was held shut by a simple magnetic clasp. He pulled it open. Inside there were about 20 pages, neatly clipped together. The top page was a cover sheet. It read, "In the Circuit Court of Shelby County, Tennessee petition for dissolution of marriage." He read the words 3 times. Dissolution of marriage, divorce. His breath hitched. His vision swam for a second, the letters blurring together. He blinked, forcing them back into focus. He flipped past the cover sheet. His name, her name, petitioner, Khadijah Denise Lattimore, respondent, Terrence Michael Johnson. He scanned the pages, his eyes catching phrases that felt like they were from a foreign language. Irreconcilable differences. No reasonable prospect of reconciliation. He got to the financial disclosures. She had listed their assets. The house in Orange Mound, valued at an oddly low $150,000. The joint checking account, with its current balance of $3,412. His 2012 Toyota Camry. That was it. There was no mention of her BMW, her separate savings account, her stock options, or the Chanel handbag. It was a carefully curated portrait of a humble couple with almost nothing to divide. A lie, crafted for a judge. Then he reached the final page, the signature page, and there it was at the bottom, in her familiar, confident script, Khadijah D. Lattimore. The signature was dated 2 days ago. The air left his lungs in a rush. He felt a strange, hollow calm descend over him. It wasn't shock anymore. It was clarity, a cold, hard, and perfect clarity. Every dismissive comment, every secret phone call, every hidden statement, every cruel laugh, it all clicked into place. The puzzle was solved. The wobbly letters on the construction paper weren't a child's confused message. They were a warning. Mama said, "Don't tell Daddy. Don't tell him she's leaving. Don't tell him she's erasing their life together." He slowly, carefully, placed the papers back into the leather folder and closed the clasp. The click echoed in the silence of the car. He sat there for a full 10 minutes, staring at the glass tower of the steakhouse, where his wife was, at that very moment, likely celebrating the beginning of her new life. A life she had built on a foundation of his love and support. A life she was now planning to launch by cutting him loose like so much dead weight. The grief he had felt for Marcus, the hurt from her insults, it all coalesced into something new. Something cold and solid. It felt like steel. The drive back to Orange Mound was silent. He didn't turn on the radio. The only sound was the familiar rattle of the passenger door, a sound he'd always meant to fix. Now it just sounded like a loose piece of a life that was already falling apart. He felt strangely empty, hollowed out. The rage and pain he expected to feel were absent, replaced by an unnerving, crystalline calm. He was no longer a husband being betrayed. He was a problem being solved. He parked the Camry in the driveway and walked into the quiet house. He checked on Amari first. She was fast asleep, one arm thrown over her unicorn pillow, her chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The sight of her, so innocent and safe in the world he had built, solidified the steel in his spine. This was not about him anymore. This was about her. He would not let Khadijah's ambition and cruelty shatter this child's world. He would stand between Amari and the fallout, a silent, immovable wall. He went into his workshop, the small converted space at the back of the garage. The air smelled of oil and metal, a scent that had always grounded him. He sat down at his sturdy wooden workbench, the one he'd built himself. He opened the drawer where he had tucked the thick cream-colored envelope from Henderson and Associates 2 weeks ago. His hands were steady now. The time for grief and hesitation was over. He slit the envelope open with a utility knife. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and another, smaller, sealed envelope with his name on it in Marcus's familiar, spiky handwriting. He read the lawyer's letter first. It was dense with legal terminology, but the message was clear. Marcus Thorne, a man of considerable wealth and no immediate family, had named him Terrence Michael Johnson as the sole heir to his entire estate. The letter included a preliminary summary of assets, a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, real estate holdings in 3 states, a venture capital fund, and cash. The preliminary valuation, the lawyer wrote, was estimated to be in excess of $60 million. $60 million. Terrence stared at the number. He read the sentence again. and again. It didn't seem real. It was a number from a movie, a figure so vast it was meaningless. He, a man who meticulously budgeted for a $12 bag of coffee, was now the owner of a fortune that could buy the entire block, the entire neighborhood, maybe the entire zip code. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. The irony was so immense, so staggering, it was almost funny. Khadijah was in a fancy restaurant toasting to her escape from her deadweight $54,000 a year husband, while that same husband sat in his garage, having just inherited a sum that dwarfed her new salary into insignificance. She was fighting for half of a $3,412 bank account while he was sitting on an empire. He finally picked up the smaller envelope, the one from Marcus. He opened it. The note was short. Terrence, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't be sad for too long. I lived a good, full life. I'm leaving you everything not because you need it, but because you deserve it. You are a man of character, a builder, not a taker. Money can be a poison or a tool. In your hands, I know it will be a tool. Build something good. Build a life worthy of your heart. P.S. Don't let anyone ever make you feel small. You are a giant. Your godfather, Marcus. A single tear, hot and sharp, escaped his eye and rolled down his cheek. It was the first tear he'd shed all night. It wasn't for his marriage. It was for Marcus, for his unwavering belief in him. You are a giant. At 6:15 a.m. the next morning, after a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, he called the number on the letterhead. Henderson and Associates, a polite voice answered. I need to speak with Mr. Henderson, Terrence said, his own voice low and firm. My name is Terrence Johnson. It's about the estate of Marcus Thorne, and I also need to retain him for a personal matter. The meeting was at 10 a.m. Mr. Henderson's office was on the top floor of a skyscraper downtown, with a panoramic view of the muddy, majestic Mississippi River. He was a distinguished black man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a suit that probably cost more than Terrence's car. He listened patiently, his hands steepled on his vast mahogany desk, as Terrence recounted the events of the previous night. He laid out the story calmly, factually, without emotion. The dismissive comments, the secret accounts, the lies, the promotion dinner, Amari's note, and finally, the divorce papers in the leather folder. When he was finished, Mr. Henderson was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. She made a critical mistake, the lawyer said, his voice a gravelly baritone. Two, actually. First, underestimating you. Second, filing first and lying on her financial disclosures. That demonstrates intent to defraud, both you and the court. What about the inheritance? Terrence asked. Can she touch it? Not a penny, Henderson said with absolute certainty. The inheritance is non-marital property. The fact that you received it after she had already taken legal steps to dissolve the marriage and kept those steps secret from you makes the timeline crystal clear. Her claim to it is non-existent. We will make sure of that. The lawyer's fee was $1,200 an hour. Terrence didn't even blink. Good, he said. Now, Mr. Henderson continued, leaning forward. She filed a petition based on lies. We will file our own, a counter-petition, and we will do it based on the truth. We will cite her emotional cruelty, her financial infidelity, and her fraudulent disclosures. We will be asking for full custody of your daughter, given her mother's demonstrated willingness to create a deceptive and unstable environment. Terrence felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled him. He wasn't alone in this anymore. He had a champion, a giant of his own. What do I do now? Terrence asked. Now, the lawyer said, a grim smile touching his lips, comes the hard part. You go home. You act normal. You say nothing. You let her believe she is in complete control. We file our petition quietly, and then we choose the time and place to let her know the game has changed. The days that followed were the performance of his life. He was an actor in a play he despised, living on a set that now felt like a cruel joke. Every morning he got up at 5:45 a.m. and made coffee. Every morning he packed Amari's lunch and wrote a note on her napkin. Every evening he made dinner. He moved through the familiar rhythms of his life, a ghost in his own home, his heart encased in a layer of protective ice. Khadijah came home from work the day after the dinner, humming a tune from the radio. She was buoyant, effervescent, with the thrill of her perceived success and secret plan. She didn't mention the celebration. She didn't have to. Victory was written all over her face. "I'm exhausted," she sighed theatrically, kicking off her $900 heels. "But it was a huge success. The VP loves my 5-year plan for the region." She paused, looking at him as he stood at the stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce he'd made from scratch using tomatoes from his garden. "What's for dinner?" "Spaghetti," he said, his voice perfectly even. "Your favorite." "Oh, okay," she said, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Maybe she'd expected him to be sullen or angry that he'd been left home. His simple, domestic normalcy seemed to unbalance her. He served her a plate, and she ate while scrolling through her phone, occasionally laughing at a text. He watched her, this stranger sitting at his table, and felt nothing but a profound, chilling distance. The love he'd once felt for her was gone, burned away by the truth he'd found in that leather folder. The tension was a physical presence in the small house, a silence thick with unspoken words. He would be in the garage, on a hushed call with Mr. Henderson, discussing asset protection and legal strategy. When he'd hear the back door open, he'd hang up abruptly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Who was that?" Khadijah asked one afternoon. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion as she walked into his workshop. He was wiping his hands on a rag, his face a mask of calm. "Just Mike from the college," he lied, the falsehood coming easily now. "We're trying to figure out the class schedule for the new TIG welding certification." She seemed to accept it, but her gaze lingered on him for a moment too long. "You've been quiet lately," she observed. "Just tired," he said, turning back to his workbench. "Long week." The lie was a bitter pill, but necessary. Every normal conversation, every shared meal, was an act of strategic restraint. He was gathering his forces, preparing his position, while she believed he was an unarmed, unsuspecting civilian. The conversations about the future became almost surreal. She started bringing home brochures for million-dollar houses in Germantown. She'd leave them on the coffee table, open to glossy pictures of grand foyers and resort-style pools. "I like this one," she said one evening, pointing to a sprawling 6,000-square-foot brick monstrosity. "It has a 4-car garage. We could finally get rid of that junk heap of yours." He looked at the picture. The price listed at the bottom was $1.8 million. "Looks expensive," he said, his tone neutral. She laughed, that same condescending little laugh that now grated on his nerves like scraping metal. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it, Terrence. I've got it covered. My life is about to begin." He just nodded. My life. Not our life. He had no idea how true that statement was about to become, just not in the way she imagined. He focused all his real emotion, all his love and fear on Amari. He spent every possible moment with her. They worked in the garden together, her small hands patting the soil around the tomato plants. They read books on the porch swing. They had dance parties in the living room to old Motown songs. He was memorizing her, branding the sound of her laughter and the feeling of her small hand in his into his soul. He was building a fortress of love around her, preparing her for a storm she didn't even know was coming. One night, as he was tucking her in, she looked up at him with those big, serious eyes. "Daddy, are you sad?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask, sweet pea?" "You look sad," she said. "In your eyes." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Daddy's just thinking. But I am the luckiest man in the whole world. You know why?" "Why?" she whispered. "Because I have you," he said, and he kissed her forehead. In that moment, surrounded by the glow of her unicorn nightlight, he knew with absolute certainty that he was already the richest man in the world. The $60 million was just paper. She was the treasure, and he would go to war to protect her. The papers from Mr. Henderson were ready on Thursday. The counter petition was a masterwork of legal precision. It detailed everything, from the hidden credit card statements to her fraudulent financial disclosures in her own petition. It included a sworn affidavit from him about her verbal cruelty, using her own phrases against her. Dead weight. Unproductive. A waiting room. It formally declared the inheritance as his sole and separate property. The petition was filed quietly at the Shelby County Courthouse at 9:03 a.m. on Friday morning. The trap was set. All he had to do was wait for her to walk into it. The strike came exactly 1 week after her first celebration dinner. Khadijah, emboldened by her team's enthusiastic response and the lack of any pushback from Terrence, decided to host a second, more intimate dinner at Argent. This one was for her direct reports and the senior vice president of the entire southern region, a man named Charles Sterling, who had flown in from Atlanta specifically for the occasion. This dinner was the final seal on her promotion, her official welcome into the executive fold. At 6:30 p.m., she was getting ready, a whirlwind of nervous energy and excitement. She had chosen an even more expensive outfit for this night, a severe but stunningly tailored navy blue Armani suit that he knew, from a discarded receipt he'd found, had cost $8,700. "Don't bother waiting up," she texted him from the driveway at 7:15 p.m. "Big night, wish me luck, so..." The XO felt like a final contemptuous twist of the knife. He read the text and felt a cold, final calm settle over him. He looked at the simple manila envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the papers. His copy of the counter petition, officially stamped and time-stamped by the court clerk, filed October 14th, 9:03 a.m. He waited until 8:30 p.m. He made sure Amari was sound asleep, her unicorn nightlight casting a soft, peaceful glow. He kissed her cheek, whispering, "Daddy will be right back." Then he picked up the envelope and walked out to his car. The drive to East Memphis was different this time. There was no dread, no confusion. There was only a grim, quiet resolve. He was no longer the wounded husband. He was an instrument of consequence. He was the man Marcus believed him to be, a giant. He pulled into the valet circle at Argent. He didn't bother with the parking garage. He stepped out of his rattling 2012 Camry and handed the keys to a surprised-looking valet. "I won't be long," he said. He walked through the heavy, polished oak doors and into the hushed, opulent lobby. The hostess, a young woman in a black dress, approached him. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm here to meet my wife," he said, his voice even. "Khadijah Johnson. Her party is in one of the private rooms." He spotted them before the hostess could reply. Through a set of glass-paned doors, he saw a private alcove, a round table set for 8, laughter and the clinking of glasses. And at the head of the table, holding a champagne flute high in the air, was Khadijah. She was radiant, powerful, the absolute center of her new universe. As he walked slowly toward the glass doors, her voice carried, sharp and clear, into the main dining room. "And I couldn't have done it without your support," she was saying to her team. Then her voice dropped into a more confidential, conspiratorial tone. But most of all, this is a toast to the future, to new beginnings. She paused for dramatic effect, a triumphant smile playing on her lips, and to finally being done with the dead weight, to the end of the dead weight years. A few of her team members laughed, a polite, if slightly uncomfortable sound. The senior VP, Charles Sterling, a man in his 50s with a stern face, offered a tight, non-committal smile. It was at that exact moment that Terrence pushed open the glass door and stepped into the alcove. The laughter died instantly. The silence that fell was absolute, a sudden vacuum in the room. Every eye snapped to him. He was a specter at their feast, a tall, powerfully built black man in a simple, clean $150 button-down shirt and dark jeans. His calm, steady gaze was fixed on his wife. Khadijah's face was a canvas of collapsing emotion. The triumphant glow vanished, replaced by a ghastly, chalky white. Her jaw went slack. The champagne flute trembled in her hand. "Terrence?" she whispered, the name a choked, strangled sound. What are you doing here?" Her team stared, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Charles Sterling's eyes narrowed, taking in the scene with a cold, analytical curiosity. A waiter, sensing the sudden, explosive tension, hurried over. "Sir, can I help you? Is there a problem?" Terrence turned his calm gaze to the waiter and offered a small, gentle smile. It was a gesture so incongruous with the tension in the room that it was utterly disarming. "No problem at all," he said, his voice soft but carrying in the stillness. "I was just hoping I might have a glass of water." The waiter, bewildered, scurried off and returned a moment later with a heavy crystal glass filled with ice water. Terrence took it. "Thank you." He walked the final few steps to the table, the manila envelope held loosely in his other hand. He stood directly across from Khadijah, looking her straight in the eye. The entire restaurant, it seemed, was now watching their silent drama unfold. He raised the glass of water. "I'd like to propose a toast, too," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the precision of a laser. "To new beginnings," he said, echoing her words, "and to clarity, the kind of clarity that only comes from the truth." He didn't drink. He set the water glass down on the table with a quiet, definitive click. Then he took the manila envelope and slid it across the polished mahogany. It glided silently across the surface, coming to a perfect stop right in front of her bread plate. Her eyes darted from his face to the envelope and back again. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "My response," he said, his voice still quiet, still calm. "To the petition you have in your tote bag. This one was filed this morning at 9 o'clock. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, will be in contact with your lawyer. I assume you've already retained one." He saw the flicker of comprehension and pure, unadulterated horror in her eyes. He saw the future she had so carefully constructed crumble into dust in a single, silent moment. He held her gaze for 1 second longer. He didn't need to say another word. He had said it all. Then he turned around, walked out of the alcove, through the now silent dining room, past the stunned hostess, and out the heavy oak doors into the cool Memphis night. He did not look back. The silence he left in his wake was more damning than any accusation, more final than any argument. It was the sound of a life being irrevocably, justly, and completely dismantled. The consequences cascaded immediately, a chain reaction of social and financial ruin. The first domino to fall was the one Khadijah valued most, her career. Charles Sterling, the senior vice president from Atlanta, was a man who prized discretion and professionalism above all else. He had witnessed her cruel public toast about dead weight, followed by the arrival of the very man she was mocking, who then proceeded to dismantle her with a quiet dignity that made her own behavior look monstrously unprofessional. He was appalled. The dinner ended abruptly. Khadijah, white-faced and trembling, could offer no explanation. The next morning, at 8 a.m., she received an email from Human Resources. Her promotion to Senior Vice President was being put on indefinite hold, pending a review of the events of the previous evening. 3 days later, the hold became permanent. Her promotion was officially rescinded. A month after that, her position at the company was eliminated due to corporate restructuring. The reason given was a lie, but the result was the same. She had lost the $150,000 a year job she had sacrificed her marriage for before she ever received a full paycheck. Her phone began to fill up with a series of frantic, escalating voicemails to Terrence. He never answered, but he saved them all, on his lawyer's advice. They were a perfect record of her unraveling. The first one came that Friday night, just 20 minutes after he left the restaurant. It was confused. "Terrence, what was that? Call me. We need to talk. This is some kind of sick joke, right?" The second came an hour later, laced with fury. "How dare you? How dare you embarrass me in front of my boss? In front of my whole team? You ruined everything. You did this to me." The third, on Saturday morning after she'd presumably read his counter petition, was a mix of justification and panic. "Okay, fine. I was going to leave you. Is that what you wanted to hear? You've been holding me back for years, Terrence. Years. You can't blame me for wanting a real life. But you can't do this. You can't take Amari." The fourth voicemail, late on Monday after her lawyer had spoken to Mr. Henderson and learned the full, staggering truth, was a choked whisper of pure horror. $60 million? The lawyer said, $60 million? You have $60 million? You knew. You sat there and let me. Oh my God. You lied to me. The irony of the accusation was apparently lost on her. The fifth and final saved message was pure, desperate pleading. "Terrence, please, please, just talk to me. We can work this out. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I love you. I've always loved you. Don't do this to us. Please, think about Amari. Think about our family." But there was no us anymore. There was no family to save. She had torched that bridge herself. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. Mr. Henderson was, as Marcus had known, a giant. The inheritance was untouchable, legally classified as Terrence's sole and separate property. Khadijah's own fraudulent divorce filing worked against her at every turn. The judge was not impressed by a woman who tried to hide assets while planning to leave her husband. When it was all said and done, the court awarded her exactly half of the only truly joint asset she had honestly declared, the $3,412 in their shared checking account. She walked away from a 10-year marriage with a check for $1,706. The day the divorce was finalized, Terrence canceled the supplementary credit cards issued in his name. The American Express card she used for her designer clothes, the Visa she used for her expensive lunches, they were declined one by one. The most satisfying cut was the BMW. The $43,000 car was leased in both their names, but he was the primary signer. Without her new salary, she couldn't make the $780 monthly payments. 2 months after the divorce, the sleek white car she saw as a symbol of her ascent was unceremoniously repossessed from the parking lot of the run-down apartment complex she now called home. Her social circle, the Raffel, the ambitious friends who had admired her drive and celebrated her promotion, evaporated. The story of her cruel toast and Terrence's quiet, devastating response became a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties in East Memphis. She was no longer the brilliant rising star. She was the grasping, cruel wife who had been publicly and righteously humbled. She was a social pariah. She had traded her family for a career, her integrity for an image, her husband's love for a bigger house. In the end, she was left with none of it. She had a one-bedroom apartment, a check for $1,706, and a future defined not by her ambition, but by the spectacular, public implosion of her life. She had wanted to be free of the dead weight, and she was. She was utterly, completely, and finally on her own. 1 year later, the world was a different place. The Memphis sun, bright and generous, streamed through the large picture windows of a charming cedar-shake cottage perched on a bluff overlooking the wide, slow-moving Mississippi River. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, sizzling bacon, and the sweet, clean scent of the river breeze. Terence, looking 10 years younger and 100 pounds lighter, stood at a large kitchen island, flipping pancakes. He wore a comfortable pair of jeans and a soft, faded t-shirt. A smile played on his lips, a real smile that reached his eyes. He looked happy. He looked free. At the rustic wooden kitchen table, Amari, now a bright and confident 8-year-old, was diligently working on a drawing. Her braids, freshly done by her great-auntie Clara, were adorned with blue and green beads that clicked softly as she moved. She was humming a little tune, a picture of contentment. This was their new life. After the divorce, Terence had sold the bungalow in Orange Mound. He'd used a fraction of the inheritance to purchase this riverside cottage for $650,000, paying in cash. It wasn't a mansion, it was a home. It had a large, welcoming porch, a sprawling yard that sloped down to the river, and a small private dock. It was filled with light, laughter, and an overwhelming sense of peace. "Look, Daddy," Amari said, holding up her finished drawing. "It's for your new office." He walked over and took the drawing from her, his heart swelling. It was a picture of the two of them, standing on their dock, holding fishing poles. The figures were drawn with the charming imprecision of a child's hand. But the details were clear. Two figures, with big smiles and deep brown skin, rendered with the brown crayon she had pressed down on firmly. The sun was a big yellow circle in the corner. At the top, in her improving handwriting, she had written, "Daddy and me, the best day." He felt a familiar lump form in his throat. He was not a welding instructor anymore. After settling all of Marcus's affairs, he had taken his godfather's final words to heart. Build something good. He'd used $5 million of the inheritance to establish a nonprofit foundation which he named the Marcus Project. Its mission was simple: to provide full scholarships and mentorship for young men and women from Memphis's underserved communities to attend trade schools, welding, plumbing, electrical, carpentry. He ran the foundation himself from a small, modest office downtown, not far from Mr. Henderson's. He was a builder again, but on a much larger scale. He was building futures. He knelt down and hugged Amari tight. "This is the best drawing I have ever seen," he whispered into her hair. "It's going right on my wall." He thought back to the man he was a year ago, the man sitting in his Camry, in that cold parking garage, his world shattering around him. He had thought wealth was a number on a bank statement, a salary, a fancy car. He had thought his wife was leaving him because he didn't have enough of it. But he had been wrong. True wealth, he now understood, had nothing to do with money. Money was a tool, just as Marcus had said. True wealth was the quiet peace of a Saturday morning with nothing to do but be present. It was the unconditional love of a child who saw you as the center of her universe. It was the freedom to wake up every day and do work that filled your soul, not just your bank account. It was character. It was integrity. It was peace. Khadijah had never understood that. She had chased a phantom, and in doing so, had lost the only real treasure she ever had. He, on the other hand, had lost a marriage, but gained the world. What do you believe is the truest measure of a person's wealth? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. We love hearing from you. And for more stories about finding strength and building a new life after betrayal, make sure you subscribe to Love Beyond Pride. He taped Amari's drawing to the refrigerator door, right in the center. "Pancakes are ready, my star," he announced. After breakfast, they grabbed their fishing poles, the simple, inexpensive ones they'd bought at Bass Pro Shops for $40 each, and walked hand in hand down the grassy slope to their dock. The river was calm, the water a muddy brown, sparkling where the sun hit it. They sat on the edge of the dock, their feet dangling just above the water, and cast their lines. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. They just sat together, sharing the comfortable silence, watching their red and white bobbers dance on the gentle current. The sun was warm on their faces, the air was clean, and in the quiet space between a father and his daughter, there was a richness more profound and lasting than any $60 million inheritance could ever buy. He was finally, truly home.